Non-politicians, how would you feel about limiting all members of Congress to an hourly wage of $14.50, double the federal minimum wage, and holding them accountable to a minimum of 40 hours of work per week? Actually, I'd do the opposite. Pay them $1 million per year. Ban all other income with penalty of jail time. No book deals, no speaker fees. For context, 2 F-35 fighter jets equals Congress's entire salary. Exactly. Limiting congressional pay means that basically only retired or independently wealthy people can serve. This is currently the case in many state houses, and it's problematic. Furthermore, the most qualified people would not want that job. Tell one of the most skilled lawyers in the world that they could make a fortune being a partner in a private firm, or make pennies working a thankless job where their entire lives are scrutinized to the finest details. What do you think they would do? Then tell a really charismatic, egotistical trust fund baby that they can be one of the most powerful people in the country and see how they react. Good idea, OP. Conversely, you may weed out all the people seeking power and money and only attract those who genuinely want to serve their country while living very comfortably on $1 million a year. Sounds like a good way to ensure only very wealthy people run for seats. If you read a lot of documentaries or follow the government business people, those CEO companies and the Senate Council seats are the same circles of people. Whoever that jump into politics shall not be allowed to own any position anymore in the private company or earn any income other than their politics position. This will help at least reduce people with hidden agenda, so if they can't earn money, they have to be rich before. They can be rich before, but have to let go their private business interests once they jump into politics, focusing their aims purely for the good of the whole nation. Politicians earn pretty high compared to many jobs, and they got high pension money on their retirement. If that is not enough, only human greed keep asking for more. I feel like this would open up politicians to more bribery. The less money politicians make, the more incentive for corruption. Bring back hanging for treason. So, a job where you can't afford to live in a city you have to spend 75% of the year in, and you'll be killed if you attempt to make more money. Sounds like people would really be lining up for that one. I think that was the point OP was trying to make though. If you can't afford to live with double the minimum wage, maybe raise it. People really need to stop using this sub to soapbox their new law proposals. Low salaries for civil servants encourage corruption. Not that it would here, since campaign donations already blow them out of the water. Either a candidate is rich, like a lot already are, or they just pay themselves from their campaign. Current FEC laws mean they'd essentially double their salary. If that's not enough and they're not already rich, then they won't run or will resort to corruption. And I can guarantee you every congressperson and senator spends that much time already on Congress-related duties if you include campaigning, strategy, meetings, communicating with constituents, etc. Unless you mean only time spent on floor, in which case that seems counterproductive. Senators spend up to 190 days on the floor per year, in probably one of the most stressful jobs in the country. Their pay is $174,000 a year. I think they're getting paid the right amount of money for what they do. And yet corruption still is a major problem for America, and it undermines its democracy every day. Our corruption is different from that in other countries. My parents are from a third world country, and back there, corruption means something very different. It means cops refusing to investigate crimes unless you give them a bribe, politicians enticing programs and outright skimming money from the top, and people just flat out taking money from the Treasury. In America, what we call corruption isn't that. It's when interest group X gives some money to their campaign to get re-elected so they can keep their jobs. The types of corruption are very different. If we limit salaries, then we're going to have more of the third world type of corruption, where politicians outright steal money or take bribes instead of, hey, if you help me get re-elected, I'll pass a law you like. While it's an okay theory, it would fail in practice. Why would you work for $14.50 in a high-stress job with low job security and no chance of a raise, when you could become a server or a bartender and make more without the stress? The only people who would go into politics would be the rich, who don't care about the salary. Do you want a government made up only of the rich? How is that different from the way it is now? because it would be 100% rich people as opposed to about 80%. Excellent. We should do everything in our power to make sure no working class or poor Americans can afford to serve in Congress. Too many of them damn rebel, and we might risk a serious threat to our corporate hegemony. Furthermore, we should make sure that any time Congress seems dysfunctional, salaries are cut off. That should provide additional pressure for the working class schmucks to find a less stressful job that consistently keeps them and their family fed. Well, for certain values of consistency. No promises, lol. And after that we can change the voting laws so that only those who own land over a certain value, and thus have a stake in the country, can vote. Just like the Founding Fathers did. No more of these liberal ideas like universal suffrage. And in order to vote, not only do you have to own land, but you also have to be a Christian straight white man. I don't think lowering the wage would encourage people to get involved in government. It would filter out the people looking to get into government for riches and prestige. People should be involved in government to better the community and stuff, rather than to make a profit, right? I know that's great in theory, but likely to never happen. But getting paid a wage isn't profit. Sure, your primary driver is to better the community or country, but competent civil servants could often make a lot of money in the private sector. If you don't have some semblance of fair compensation, you won't get competent people holding public office positions. No college-educated person would want to work a high-profile, high-stress, high-turnover rate, low-wage job. We'd basically be leaving our governing up to people willing to work an insane stress job who aren't educated enough to get something better paying. Really seems like we'd be setting the country up to fail. You can drive a bus and make almost twice as much as that. Already wealthy people don't have to care about salary as well. Especially people who are wealthy and can just afford to pay for somebody else's expenses, who guess what probably hold high positions in companies and would benefit a lot of political power. They could make up the difference giving speeches after. The median rent in DC is $2,700 a month, and you want to pay them around $2,320 a month? That seems like a really bad idea. So they live like the average American then? Wouldn't the politician response to be to live with other people to help pay the rent? The average American doesn't make minimum wage. Those who aren't rich quit because they can't afford to be politicians anymore. Those who are rich and didn't care about the issue of minimum wage get to stay and increase, since people who weren't rich just left. You now have people who are rich making your laws, people who are owners of big companies and would benefit a lot from making minimum wage lower, since it would increase their income. And before someone says, but they don't get to make external money outside the job, their dad does, their mum does, their brother does. Very easy for people who own big companies to just pay for their brother, son, friends' expenses, so they get to stay there and incentivize them to make decisions that make them richer. Clichés aside, being a member of Congress is a 24/7 job. They spend all day in committee meetings and all weekend dealing with constituents and holding events like town halls at home. Even when the House and Senate aren't in session, they're back home in their district offices working on local issues. Don't believe the story that it's a part-time job. It's not. Yeah, the job isn't just legislating, it's dealing with constituents and running for office, like it or not. A congressman who you agree with who loses re-election is worth less to you than one you disagree with who stays in office and can deal with issue important to your district. We'd have to eliminate campaign funds, soft money, and lobbyists. However, if hypothetically this were to happen and that was all they could earn and they clocked in like everyone else, we'd probably see a more realistic representation of Americans. The current politicians would leave for the private sector. That could be a great thing, but could just as easily be a total failure. I'd like to think if it more reflected our current electorate, the laws would more positively reflect what we want and need as a country. But I'm an idealist. Pretty much no sane person would want to have this work, unless you're already filthy rich, or your family can pay for your expenses. Also, encouraging bribes. Who do you think can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for college, go into a very stressful job which consumes a lot of time and pays very low? People who already don't care about money. Oh, you're a mid-class citizen? Well, you better don't come here, because you won't have money to pay rent and student loans. Oh, you're a low-class citizen. Not even a chance to pay rent and food. Oh, you're really rich, and the salary doesn't matter to you. Welcome then. Why would you expect Ivy League law school workers that literally have to draft law to earn the same as a McDonald's employees? I think the point was that they increased the wage for, metaphorically or literal, McDonald's employees and help the country to help themselves. Congress is a C-suite level management job and takes similar skills. If you do not compensate comparably, then there are only two reasons someone will take the job: civic duty or various forms of corruption. One can only ask someone to take so much of a pay cut in the name of civic duty. TLDR. Limiting Congress's pay excessively would increase corruption. I think you're right about corruption. It's a very common concern with the idea I pitched. There are only two reasons someone would take the job: civic duty or various forms of corruption. Plus, those who seek power for power's sake. They aren't necessarily corrupt, think religious zealots. Just want to impose their will on others. And the civic duty people would need to be independently wealthy, either rich or retired. So they'd be very limited and skewed to a small subset of demographics. I'd also like them to be made to wear the logos of every corporate sponsor they receive money from. Sort of like they do in NASCAR. If they want to be corporate whores, let us see exactly who owns them. Just to be clear, I'm not saying people in NASCAR are corporate whores. Corporate sponsorship is fine in sports. I'd also like them to be made to wear the logos of every corporate sponsor they receive money from. Sort of like they do in NASCAR. If they want to be corporate whores, let us see exactly who owns them. The only way that'd work is not as a law itself, but blackmail to get them to drop all the sponsors they wouldn't want exposed as in practice, as a law if they could control where to put the logos. As in practice, as a law, if they could control where to put the logos. If they couldn't, truly problematic ones wouldn't have room. They'd just put the shady ones someplace that wouldn't usually get shown to the public, like their armpits or whatever. My belief is that politicians aren't paid enough. Congress should get at least $1 million a year. Senate and Supreme Court, $2 million. President, $4 million. In exchange, they liquidate everything except for a house in their district. A couple of cars and some sentimental stuff will be allowed. The funds are held in trust by the Treasury Department for the duration of their term. While in DC, they live in a dorm and eat in a cafeteria. Discovery of any bribes leads to forfeiture of their assets. Let me guess, they also have to wear some kind of coverall uniform and liquidate all their clothes, and they can't talk about their past and basically other ways. Let's make this full young adult dystopia, including that they can't fall in love. This is not a hill I'd die on, pun intended. Term limits, an end to lobbying, and the dissolution of PACs are more important to me. Term limits are a common topic I've seen mentioned today. If the president, why not the politician? What Congress does is worth a lot more than $14.50 an hour. Nobody would ever want to be in Congress if that was their pay. Kinda defeats the point of having Congress. What Congress does is arguably not a whole lot for the average person most of the time. Only once in a great while have they passed laws that benefit people like myself. The fact the country exists and has roads and schools and jobs and exports goods abroad while trading back with other nations, and you can travel abroad freely, that people have freedoms and rights, that there's clean air and water, that police and armed forces are governed by the rule of law, are all things that benefit people like yourself. Yeah, except none of the guys up there right now have done any of this. This was all put in place, and people like you and me have been maintaining it now for a while. The country exists from people fighting for our stuff 243 years ago. Roads, First National Road was started in 1811. First American school was founded in 1635, and 1918 was when it was required to attend at least until elementary was completed. Trade started from the beginning. The US didn't start restricting travel until recently. The freedoms and rights was started back when the Constitution was written. The current elected officials have removed laws in place by the last couple sitting presidents that protected clean air and water. Flint, Michigan would like to have a word with you on clean water. The police are on an all-time high of abuse of power, or at least those being reported. Our current armed forces are running at 50% readiness due to production not willing or able to supply them with the parts needed to get equipment up to a more reasonable number. I won't even get into the fact that they dismantle many of the safety programs that would have helped us during this outbreak. Right now, there are 28 million people out of work, nearly 100,000 dead because those in charge are done nothing but try to line their own pockets and agenda. So tell me what the current sitting president or Congress has done that benefits the average person, because I doubt it will outweigh the things they have done wrong.